What if the man you dismissed as not belonging in first class turned out to be the CEO of the airline you're working for? What if, in just 6 minutes, your prejudice cost you your job and changed the face of the aviation industry forever? On an ordinary flight from Los Angeles to New York, one black man boarded quietly, dressed in a hoodie and jeans, ticket in hand, calm in demeanor. But what happened next would ignite a firestorm across the country. He was denied his seat not because of a booking error, but because of an assumption: what the crew didn't know. That man was Elijah Brooks, founder of a multi-million-dollar airline recently merged into the very company he was flying with. And he wasn't just another passenger. He was the man who had the power to dismantle everything they thought they controlled. Who is Elijah Brooks, really? Why did he stay silent at first? And how did a quiet confrontation at 30,000 feet spark a national conversation about race, dignity, and quiet power? Stay with us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories that shake the system and celebrate justice. Now, let's begin. It began with a glance. Not a word, not a question, not even a smile. Just a narrowed pair of eyes, a purse of the lips, and a pause so sharp it sliced through the hum of boarding announcements like a blade. "Sir," the flight attendant said, her voice crisp and clipped, "I need to see your boarding pass again." Elijah Brooks looked up. He had just stepped into the first-class cabin of Aeromark Flight 313, bound for Boston from Denver. It was early morning, the kind of tired silence that wrapped around the inside of an airplane, broken only by the shuffle of passengers and the metallic snap of overhead bins closing. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he offered a calm nod and handed over his pass. It was neatly folded, creased only once, with the words printed clearly: Elijah M. Brooks, Seat 2A, Priority 1. The attendant glanced at the name. Her frown deepened. "This doesn't look right." Elijah raised an eyebrow, still silent. She tapped her tablet. The screen flickered, then glitched. She sighed, then looked up again, more firmly this time. "You're not in our system. This seat is reserved for priority passengers." There was no hostility in Elijah's posture. He stood still, tall, composed, dressed in a black zip-up hoodie, dark tailored jeans, and low-profile sneakers. He looked more like a software engineer than a CEO, but his presence filled the space, even in silence. "I am a priority passenger," he said gently. The attendant's name tag read Miranda Hale. Her posture stiffened. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll need you to step aside until we verify your status." Around them, other passengers began to notice. Some looked up with half-curious expressions. Others, like the man seated in 2C, openly stared. A pause lingered in the air, thick and uneven. Elijah didn't move. Behind him, a voice spoke up quietly. "Elijah, do you want me to handle this?" It was Amira Sloan, his assistant. She stood just behind him, holding his carry-on and her phone. Calmly, with practiced discretion, she had already begun recording. Not out of paranoia, but habit one. Too many close calls had taught them to keep a record, even when no one else would. Elijah glanced at her and shook his head softly. "No," he said, still looking at Miranda. "Let's give her a chance." Miranda narrowed her eyes. "I'm doing my job," she said. "This is a security protocol." Elijah didn't argue. "Then follow your protocol," he said. "Check the manifest." A second flight attendant approached. Male, sandy blonde hair, early 30s, holding a smaller tablet that looked just as frozen as Miranda's. His name tag read Brady Collins. "What's going on here?" "This passenger's name isn't coming up for 2A, Miranda said. "I think it might be an error, or something else." Brady glanced at the pass, then at Elijah. "Let me check the handheld," he said. As Brady tapped, Miranda folded her arms. "We've had fake boarding passes before," she said under her breath. Amira's eyes flashed. "Elijah," she whispered, "that's on record." He didn't respond. He simply stood there, letting the moment sink in. The man in 2C, a white gentleman in his 50s wearing a gray blazer and loafers, leaned slightly into the aisle. "This is first class." "Right," he said loudly. "Not the tech lounge." Miranda said nothing. Brady looked up from his tablet. "Yeah, he's not listed on 2A. I'd like you to check the printed manifest," Elijah said calmly. Miranda's tone shifted. "The digital manifest is the most up-to-date. We print them in advance, but changes happen constantly." Elijah nodded. "Good. Then you should have both." He reached into the side pocket of his jacket and pulled out his ID. It wasn't flashy. A standard Aeromark Platinum executive card and a laminated identification card with a photo and a QR code. The name matched. The picture matched. Miranda took one look and waved it off. "Anyone can print these. It doesn't mean anything unless it matches our system." Amira took one step forward. "We'll wait. But please be advised that this entire conversation is being documented for legal purposes." Brady stiffened. Miranda scoffed. From row 3, a woman in a tan blazer leaned forward, her phone angled just slightly in her lap. Harper Wynn, a freelance journalist who had spent the last 6 months covering corporate diversity failures, raised her eyebrows. "What exactly is the issue here?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but direct. "This gentleman is trying to claim a seat that's already been flagged," Miranda said. Elijah raised his voice just enough to be heard. "I'm not claiming anything. I purchased this ticket. I hold documentation. And I'm here on time, with proper ID." Miranda folded her arms. "You're not in the manifest?" A pause. Elijah looked her in the eyes. "Then, your manifest is wrong." Silence again. Brady looked at Miranda. She didn't blink. "Elijah," Amira said quietly, "should I send the text?" He nodded once. Behind her back, she pressed send. Meanwhile, Miranda took a small step forward, her voice lower, now laced with finality. "If you continue to hold up the boarding process, we may need to call security." Harper's camera was now fully recording. Elijah didn't flinch. "Miranda Hale, Brady Collins," he said clearly. "You've accused me of fraud, implied criminality, and denied boarding based on appearance, and you're doing it in front of a witness, a camera, and a legal record." The man in 2C chuckled. "Come on, man. Don't make this bigger than it is." Elijah turned to him slowly. "What's your name?" "Sir?" He hesitated. Greg Talbot." "Thank you," Elijah said. He turned back to Miranda. "I won't be repeating myself. Check the printed manifest. And do it now." Her hand hovered over the intercom. The tension pressed against the cabin like altitude. Then Brady spoke again, his voice cracking slightly. We don't have the updated printout yet. Maybe there was a glitch." Miranda hesitated. That's when Amira's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, then handed it silently to Elijah. He read the message, then met Miranda's eyes. "In 5 minutes, the situation will be escalated to corporate. If you're wrong, this is the last flight you'll ever supervise. No shouting, no threats, just quiet certainty." And the echo of something shifting in the air. Time slowed. Passengers continued filing into the cabin, unaware that the silence between seats 2A and the galley door was now louder than the roll of any carry-on wheels. Elijah Brooks remained in place, his boarding pass still in Miranda Hale's hand, the digital manifest still blinking uncertainly in Brady Collins' frozen grip. Outside the cabin window, the sky was beginning to pale, a soft Denver sunrise trying to break through low clouds. But inside, the tension sat like a thunderhead, just waiting for a spark. Brady cleared his throat. Sometimes the system flags incomplete check-ins as economy reassignments, he mumbled. It could be a kiosk glitch. The handheld hasn't synced with the central server yet. Then sync it, Elijah said, voice calm but unwavering. Because I didn't pay for economy. Miranda didn't budge. She was holding her ground the way someone holds their breath, not because they're sure, but because they're afraid of what happens if they let it go. It's not about the payment, she said, her jaw tight. It's about verification. And how long, Elijah asked, does verification usually take when the passenger is wearing a suit and tie? Amira, still standing just behind him, whispered, confirmation received, internal verified name, seat, and priority status. Timestamped at 6:43. Harper Wynn in 3B shifted her phone, still recording subtly. She'd seen enough interviews to know when a story was unfolding in real time. Her breath caught as she zoomed slightly to capture Miranda's face. Miranda wasn't cruel. She wasn't loud or angry. But she was sure of one thing: this man, in his hoodie and soft-spoken voice, did not fit the image in her head of someone who should be standing where he was standing. And because she couldn't explain it, she fell back on procedure. This isn't personal, she said, eyes narrowing. It never is, Elijah replied. Until it is. Greg Talbot let out a quiet laugh. All of this over a hoodie. Elijah didn't look at him. I've worn hoodies to investor meetings, private terminals, and White House briefings, he said. Only on airplanes have I had to explain myself. Greg shrugged. Maybe that says something about the airlines? No, Elijah said, now turning slowly to face him. It says something about you. Greg's smile faltered just a bit. Miranda crossed her arms again, defaulting to control. We can't just let you stay in 2A based on what you say you paid. That's not how this works. Elijah reached for his wallet and pulled out a small black card, sleek and minimal. Amira tapped her screen and opened a confirmation email from Aeromark's priority client desk. If you scan this, Elijah said, you'll see it's tied to a corporate account under the name Brooks and Slate Capital. I purchased my ticket through executive routing. You'll also find my ID has board-level clearance. Brady blinked. Board-level Miranda's eyes flicked toward the ID, then quickly back to her tablet. Amira leaned in. Miss Hale, if you'd like, I can send you the secure link now. No, Miranda said sharply. I still don't see him in the system. Because, Elijah replied, your system is broken, but I am not. He didn't say it with anger. He said it with finality. Brady shifted his weight awkwardly. Maybe we should just hold boarding for a second. Recheck everything. Greg rolled his eyes. Oh, for God's sake. Are we going to delay this flight because one guy doesn't want to sit where he's told? Harper raised her voice, low but pointed. Or are we about to delay a flight because a verified passenger keeps getting told he doesn't look the part? That landed hard. The woman in seat 1A turned halfway around. The couple across in 2D stopped speaking mid-sentence. Even the flight attendant in the rear galley, pouring coffee, paused midstream. Miranda's hand moved to the intercom. Elijah didn't flinch. If you call security, I will allow it. I will step aside. But not without stating clearly, for the record, that you denied a boarding verified, cleared passenger with valid ID because you didn't see him on a malfunctioning screen. Brady looked pale now. I mean, we do have syncing issues sometimes. The update cycle lags. Harper's voice cut in again. Then, maybe the issue isn't the name on the list, but the list you're willing to believe. Miranda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Greg leaned back, muttering, Everyone's so sensitive now. Amira whispered to Elijah. We've got 4 emails in response. Boardroom confirmed, legal watching. Elijah exhaled slowly. He remembered a different airport, a different line. He was 26, just off a red-eye from Seoul, arriving for a panel at a financial summit in Chicago. He had shown up to the VIP counter with his badge and invitation in hand. The attendant didn't even glance down. She simply pointed to the general line and said, "Deliveries enter through the rear." He had stepped back, lips pressed, pulse calm. The next day, that same airline found its contract renegotiated by a company whose boardroom he now quietly chaired. He didn't shout then. He wouldn't shout now. Instead, he stepped forward just slightly, toward Miranda. "You're afraid," he said, "not of me, but of being wrong." Miranda's face flushed. "I'm afraid of breaking security protocol." "No," he said gently. "You're afraid that if you're wrong, everything you believe about who belongs where might fall apart." A pause. Then Brady's tablet buzzed. He looked down. His face changed. Updated manifest just came in. Full sync, Elijah Brooks, 2A, priority 1, cleared, silence. Elijah didn't speak. He just watched Miranda. She looked down, then back up. Her mouth moved, but the apology never came out. Greg muttered, "Probably paid someone to fix the list." Amira didn't even glance his way. "Say that again for the lawsuit." Brady stepped back slowly. "We should let him take his seat." Harper lowered her phone, voice soft. "Or maybe we should all sit with this moment a little longer." Miranda took a step back from the aisle. Not in surrender, but in slow, reluctant retreat. Elijah turned to Amira. "Begin the record." She tapped the screen. "This is Elijah M. Brooks, confirmed shareholder and executive advisor to Aeromark Airlines. Denied first-class seating despite valid ID and verified boarding. Crew involved Miranda Hale, Brady Collins. Additional witness Greg Talbot." Harper added her own voice, clear and steady. "And Harper Wynn, passenger, row 3B, independent journalist. Full video captured, no edits, no enhancements." Elijah stepped quietly into seat 2A. He didn't rush. He sat like he'd always belonged there, because he had, and now everyone knew it. Elijah Brooks sat in seat 2A. Finally. But peace didn't come with the seatbelt click. The tension that had spread through the cabin like wildfire didn't simply vanish. It lingered, clung to the walls, hung in the space between his breath and the voice in his mind that still whispered a cruel question. Why did they doubt you? He'd done everything right. Checked in, paid full fare, showed ID, spoke with calm. Still, he had to fight for a seat that was his by right. It wasn't new, but it still hurt. He looked down at his sneakers, matte black, spotless, laces tucked. He'd worn them deliberately. Comfort on flights was non-negotiable. The charcoal hoodie he had on was one of 5 nearly identical ones he owned, tailored, minimal, designed by a black-owned label based in Brooklyn. He didn't dress this way because he didn't care. He dressed this way because he didn't need to perform for respect anymore. Or so he thought. Across the aisle, Miranda Hale stood by the galley door, staring at the beverage cart like it held answers. Her arms were crossed, her jaw tight. The headset on her ear blinked faintly, waiting for her to respond to the captain's check-in. She hadn't spoken since the manifest updated, since her assumptions lost their armor. Brady Collins sat crouched just outside the aisle, eyes flicking between his tablet and the seat map, as if trying to escape notice by focusing on logistics. Every movement he made now was cautious, like walking across ice too thin to trust. Greg Talbot had stopped muttering, but the folded arms and narrowed gaze toward Elijah still said enough. His mind hadn't changed, only his audience had. And from seat 3B, Harper Wynn continued recording quiet, steady, professional. But her eyes, when they met Elijah's, weren't those of a passive observer. They were searching, not for a headline, for a heartbeat, for the story beneath the surface. Elijah looked out the window. He remembered his father once saying, "The suit doesn't make the man, but some people only see the suit." At 14, he didn't understand what that meant. At 36, he understood it too well. The suit didn't come with respect. But a hoodie, apparently, came with suspicion. He didn't blame Miranda entirely. What she had done wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern. But now, sitting in 2A with everyone watching, Elijah faced a new choice: stay quiet and let the seat speak for itself. Or stand up again, not for himself this time, but for the next person who wouldn't have a camera, an assistant, or 38% of the company behind them. Amira leaned toward him, voice low. "I've started the secondary log, all footage backed up to cloud. 3 board members have opened the thread." Elijah nodded once. "You okay?" she asked. He thought about that. He was used to corporate combat. He'd been in rooms where billions were negotiated with a handshake and a half-smile. He'd been overlooked, interrupted, misnamed. But something about this morning cut differently, because it happened in public, because it happened so casually. And because the worst part wasn't the delay, it was how certain they were that he didn't belong. "I'm steady," he said. He was lying, a little, but he needed to be. Harper stood and quietly made her way to the aisle. She approached slowly, holding her phone to her chest. "Mr. Brooks." He turned. "Just Elijah," he said. She nodded. "I won't take long. I just wanted to say I saw what happened, and I've seen it before." He met her eyes, but not always captured. "No," she said, "and not always to someone who can do something about it." There was no arrogance in her tone, only hope. Elijah paused. He glanced toward Miranda, who was now fiddling with a drawer, her hands moving, but her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "People have said worse to me," he said, but it wasn't just what she said. It's how she looked at me, like the seat was offended by my presence. Harper nodded. "That's what I want to write about. Not just policy failure, but the look." Elijah let out a soft exhale. "Then write it right." Harper tilted her head. "What do you mean, don't make me a symbol?" Elijah said. "Make me a man who's tired, who did everything right, who paid, who showed up early, who carried no threat, and still had to prove he was worth a chair." Harper swallowed. "I will." As she returned to her seat, Elijah turned toward the aisle. He saw Brady whisper something to Miranda. Her head shook sharply, and in that instant, he saw it. She wasn't angry. She was afraid. Afraid that the assumption she made would cost her more than a reprimand. Afraid that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was exposure. Elijah didn't hate her, but he couldn't protect her, because protecting her meant abandoning the invisible weight he'd carried onto that plane. Years of microcuts. The time in Tokyo when he'd been mistaken for a porter and handed luggage by a guest who never apologized. The restaurant in Dallas where the valet refused his keys, assuming he was making a delivery. The charity gala where someone asked him what rapper crew he belonged to. Always quiet, always dismissed, always watching. Amira's voice pulled him back. "Legal has advised we have discretion if you want to issue formal internal complaint or terminate your call." He looked at her, then looked at the headset still hanging from Miranda's shoulder. "What do you think she's telling herself right now?" he asked. Amira hesitated, that she was doing her job, that it wasn't personal, that the system failed, not her. Elijah nodded slowly. People rarely admit when it was them. He stood. The cabin quieted as soon as he moved. Even the flight crew toward the back looked up. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned to Miranda and asked, "May I speak to you in the galley for a moment?" Miranda froze, then nodded. As they stepped into the narrow corridor beside the coffee trays, away from cameras but not out of earshot, Elijah stood tall, hands relaxed by his sides. "You made a judgment," he said, "and it turned out to be wrong." "I followed protocol," she said quickly. "No," he said, "you followed an instinct, one shaped by a pattern, and you acted before confirming." She said nothing. "I don't believe you're a bad person," Elijah said, "but I do believe you're part of something broken, and that means you have a choice." She blinked. What kind of choice? He didn't answer right away, because even in this moment he was still deciding, still debating if mercy would lead to change or just more silence. When he spoke, his voice was steady. "You can acknowledge it now, here, without excuses, without deflection, or this becomes a corporate matter. Not because I want revenge, but because I won't allow this to repeat unchecked." Miranda looked away. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't think someone like you." He waited. She stopped herself. "That's exactly the problem," Elijah said. He stepped back, and as he turned toward the aisle again, he felt every pair of eyes on him, but he didn't flinch. He walked back to seat 2A, not for comfort, but to remind everyone watching that he belonged there long before the manifest caught up. For the next few minutes, no one said a word. Elijah Brooks remained seated in 2A, hands resting lightly on his lap, eyes fixed out the window. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. The clouds beyond the glass were just scenery. The real turbulence was inside the plane. Miranda Hale hadn't returned to service. She stood in the galley near the forward lavatory, one hand pressed flat against the wall, the other gripping her headset so tightly her knuckles were white. Brady Collins moved with mechanical precision, quietly helping a woman lift her suitcase into the overhead bin, mumbling, "Welcome aboard," without making eye contact with anyone. His usual energy had been drained. He looked like a man slowly realizing he'd been standing on the wrong side of something big. The cabin was now almost fully boarded. The doors hadn't yet been sealed, and tension hung thick in the air like humidity before a storm. Harper Wynn finished uploading the first wave of video footage to a private drive. She wasn't recording now, but she kept her phone in her lap, unlocked, as if the moment needed guarding. Her eyes occasionally flicked toward Miranda, then toward Elijah, then back again. Elijah's phone vibrated softly on the tray table beside him. He glanced down. Amira had message from a few rows behind. "Print manifest just arrived. Hand-delivered by gate agent. You're listed? Confirmed. Hard copy." He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Across the aisle. Greg Talbot sighed like someone forced to endure a long wait at a coffee shop. He crossed his legs, shifted in his seat, and muttered just loud enough to be heard by those nearby. "I still don't get what the big deal is. It was a mistake. These things happen." Elijah turned his head slowly, resting his gaze on Greg for a long beat. "Do they?" Greg raised his eyebrows. "It's not like she dragged you off the plane." "No," Elijah replied. "She just questioned my right to be here, loudly, in public, before even checking a list." Greg shrugged. "You said yourself there was a glitch." "That's not what she said," Elijah replied. "She said I didn't belong." Greg huffed. "Maybe don't take everything so personally." Harper spoke up before Elijah could respond. "If it happened to you," she said calmly, "you'd call it personal too." Greg didn't reply. In the front galley, a soft knock came at the door. The gate agent appeared with a printed manifest. Miranda took it, didn't speak, and flipped through the sheets quickly. Her eyes scanned the columns until they locked onto a name she had already seen 3 times today. Elijah M. Brooks. Seat 2A. Priority 1. Verified through board-level clearance. She stared at it for a moment longer than necessary, as if daring the paper to take it back. Then, slowly, she walked toward Elijah's seat. The entire first-class cabin seemed to hold its breath. Brady followed at a distance, watching her like someone unsure if they were witnessing courage or collapse. When she reached his row, Miranda didn't look him in the eye. She held out the manifest, wordlessly. Elijah looked up at her, then at the paper, then back at her. "Your system missed me," he said evenly. "Then your tablet missed me. Then you missed me." Miranda didn't argue. She simply said it wasn't intentional. "That," Elijah replied, "is why it's dangerous." There was a beat of silence. Then Brady cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, I think the manifest might have reset the moment the payment was flagged. If the card failed on your first attempt, it could have pushed the name into a pending queue." Elijah's voice didn't rise. "Let me ask you something," he said to Brady. "If I had been wearing a tailored suit, carrying a briefcase, would either of you have stopped me, or would you have assumed the manifest was wrong?" Neither Brady nor Miranda answered. Harper stood slowly from her seat in 3B. "Can I ask a question?" Miranda turned, surprised. Harper raised her phone slightly but didn't hit record. "Did you ask anyone else for additional ID during boarding today, or just him?" Miranda opened her mouth, closed it, thought. "No," she admitted, "just him." Harper nodded. "Then it wasn't about protocol. It was about instinct. And that's what we're all here to question." The air in the cabin shifted slightly. Not softer, just clearer. Amira stood and walked down the aisle toward Elijah. She handed him a small folder with the printed boarding confirmation, his ID, and a copy of Aramark's shareholder agreement for good measure. "You're officially validated on every level," she said, voice dry. Elijah opened the folder and glanced down at the crisp printouts. Neat, precise, undeniable. "I always was," he said quietly. Then, louder, the only thing that changed was who had the proof. He looked up at Miranda. "I'm not asking for an apology. Not yet. I'm asking if you see the pattern." Miranda swallowed hard. "I see. A mistake." Elijah waited. "A mistake in process," she added, "and maybe in perception." Harper clicked her pen softly. "You can call it perception, or you can call it what it is." Miranda looked at her, guarded. "Profiling," Harper said plainly. Brady looked like he might be sick. Amira turned to Miranda. "You flagged his card, you flagged his name, you flagged his clothes. At what point does it stop being about glitches?" Miranda stared at the floor. "I've had training," she said. "We were told to watch for certain behaviors." "What kind of behaviors?" Elijah asked. Miranda hesitated. "Clothing that didn't match the class level. Unusual travel patterns. Lack of elite markers. We were told informally to double-check." "Informally," Elijah repeated, "but enforced." Brady nodded slowly. "We never got written guidelines, but everyone knew." Greg scoffed under his breath. "Sounds like common sense to me." Harper didn't look at him. Common sense has never been so dangerous. Elijah reached for his phone and tapped the record button. "This is Elijah Brooks. I am officially confirming that Aramark flight crew members have just admitted to an informal, undocumented profiling protocol based on attire and assumed status. I have been listed on this flight under verified priority clearance, and I was denied entry to my seat without due process." He stopped recording, then looked at Miranda one last time. "I don't need a spectacle," he said. "I need accountability. And it's coming." She didn't respond. She just walked slowly back to the galley and closed the curtain behind her. The curtain dividing the galley from first class whispered, "Shut," but the tension it left behind did not. Elijah Brooks sat with his hands folded on his lap, eyes fixed ahead, not looking at anyone in particular, but seeing everything. The manifest had caught up with reality. The paper trail confirmed what he already knew. But the damage wasn't in the denial. It was in the moments before it, when he'd been judged, questioned, and nearly dismissed without so much as a second look. It wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about the system behind the seat, across the aisle. Greg Talbot let out a slow breath like a man winding up to speak again, as if the quiet had gone on too long for his liking. "You know what I think," he said, turning toward Elijah without waiting for permission. "This whole thing feels overblown. I've flown Aeromark every week for 6 years. First class. Always. I know the kind of people who sit here." The words hung in the air like smoke from a slow-burning fire. Harper Wynne, still seated in 3B, didn't lift her phone this time. She simply looked up, her expression still and unreadable. Elijah didn't move. Greg continued, as if trying to reason with a child. "It's not about color. Okay, I don't care what anyone looks like, but this is first class. There's a certain standard." "What standard is that?" Elijah asked, voice calm. Greg shrugged. "You know, presentation, professionalism. There's a reason why business class looks a certain way, why the cabin's quiet, composed. It's not a free-for-all. You don't just waltz in here in a hoodie and jeans like you rolled out of a gym." Elijah's gaze was still, measured. "Let me ask again," he said. "What kind of people do you think sit in first class?" Greg hesitated. The edges of his confidence curled inward. "I didn't mean it that way," he said. "But you said it that way," Harper replied, her tone sharper than before. And people heard it. Miranda Hale had returned to the galley and stood just behind the curtain, only partly hidden. She was listening. Amira, still standing near Elijah's seat, crossed her arms slowly and looked directly at Greg. "Let me guess," she said. "When you see someone in a suit, it means they earned the seat. When you see someone in a hoodie, it means they're sneaking in." Greg leaned back. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to," Elijah said. "You're not the first to think it. And that's the problem." Another passenger in 1A, a woman in a burgundy blazer and gold-framed glasses, spoke for the first time. "You know," she said thoughtfully. "When I boarded, the gate agent scanned my pass and called me Miss Chairman. I've never had a title like that, but I was wearing a pantsuit, so they assumed—" She looked at Elijah. "I wonder what they saw when you walked through." Elijah smiled faintly, but there was no amusement in it. "They saw a question," he said, "not an answer." Miranda stepped back into the aisle. Her voice wasn't combative this time. It was lower, more uncertain. "I'd like to clarify something," she said, addressing the cabin but glancing often at Elijah. "This morning's manifest sync issue created several delays. We've had payment failures at the kiosks, and the system rerouted some bookings. I acted based on what I saw in real time." Elijah turned toward her. "And what you saw," he said slowly, "was a man you didn't expect to see in 2A." She flinched, just slightly. "I acted on policy." She said, "No," Harper cut in. "You acted on perception." Greg exhaled hard, shaking his head. "You people are exhausting." Silence. Absolute silence. The words hit the cabin like a dropped fork in a cathedral. Harper's hands twitched toward her phone. Amira's expression hardened. Elijah didn't blink. "You people," he repeated, as if tasting the phrase in his mouth. I didn't mean it like that, Greg said quickly, his voice defensive now. It's just... this whole thing, the recordings, the drama, it's disruptive. Amira stepped forward, speaking clearly enough for the nearby passengers to hear. Disruptive is being told you don't belong in a seat you paid for. Disruptive, Harper added, is the casual way some of you reduce someone's presence to too loud the moment they defend themselves. Greg's cheeks colored. It was a misunderstanding. He got the seat, didn't he? What else do you want? Elijah looked around the cabin. The question wasn't rhetorical anymore. It was a mirror. I want a world, he said slowly, where I don't have to carry paperwork to justify my dignity. He turned toward Miranda. I want a flight where staff don't rely on stereotypes dressed up as protocol. He turned toward Greg. And I want passengers who can sit beside a black man in first class without questioning how he got there. There was nothing theatrical about his voice. It was quiet, controlled, devastating. Harper finally pressed record again. Say it again, she whispered. Elijah met her eyes. I didn't come here to make a scene. I came here to fly. But since the scene already happened, I'm going to make sure it changes something. Behind him, Amira's phone buzzed again. She read it, then whispered, board member confirmed escalation rights. Full discretion granted. Elijah gave the smallest nod. Miranda took a step forward. I didn't intend to profile you, she said quietly. It's just, we're trained to flag inconsistencies. And if I'd been white, Elijah asked, in the same hoodie, same boarding pass, same glitch, would you have flagged me? Miranda didn't answer. Brady, still hovering nearby, spoke instead. I probably wouldn't have... There it was, the answer no one wanted to say out loud. The cabin fell silent again. Elijah leaned back in his seat, eyes closing briefly, breath steady. Then he opened them. This is the last flight I ever let this slide, he said, and no one, not even Greg, dared say a word. The flight crew sealed the cabin doors 10 minutes behind schedule. No announcements were made. No cheerful reminders of flight time or complimentary beverages. Just a slow, measured closing of the aircraft's shell, as if the plane itself understood the gravity of what had unfolded inside it. Elijah Brooks remained seated in 2A, his posture composed, his eyes steady, but inside there was no stillness. He had made his statement. He had spoken clearly, but he wasn't finished. Not yet. Amira Sloan returned to her seat beside him, placing her tablet on the armrest between them. Her expression was calm, but the tension in her shoulders told another story. The full report is ready, she whispered. Footage backed up, time-stamped. The board liaison has been pinged. Legal confirms you can invoke immediate disciplinary action if you choose. Elijah didn't respond. He stared out the window at the rolling line of jet bridges across the tarmac, his own reflection faint against the glass. He thought of his father again, a soft-spoken man who once sold used books on a sidewalk in Detroit, who taught him how to speak gently and mean every word, who told him, when the room forgets who you are, remind them without raising your voice. He had carried that lesson into every boardroom. Today, he carried it into seat 2A. Behind him, Brady Collins busied himself with pre-flight checks, but his movements were robotic. His gaze kept drifting back to Elijah, to Amira, then to Miranda, who now stood at the front of the cabin staring at the cockpit door like it might open and swallow her whole. Passengers whispered in low tones, but no one raised their voice. The energy had shifted. It was no longer about seating or policy. It was about watching something play out that most people only read about. Quiet prejudice, public exposure, a reckoning in real time. Harper Wynn hadn't stopped recording. Her phone rested against her thigh, angled just enough to catch movement without being intrusive. Her journalistic instincts were working overtime, but so was her heart. She knew what she was documenting was bigger than a viral moment. It was structural, systemic, silent until now. Greg Talbot had finally gone quiet. He sat slumped in his seat, arms crossed, lips tight. He avoided eye contact with everyone. Maybe he felt embarrassed. Maybe not. But he didn't speak again. Elijah finally turned to Amira. "What do you think she's doing right now?" Amira followed his gaze to Miranda, who was pretending to read the safety card. Convincing herself this was all procedural, she said, telling herself it wasn't personal, that it was a misunderstanding. Elijah's voice was low. "That's how it survives." Amira tilted her head. "What does the pattern?" Elijah replied, "The one that lets people look at someone like me, dressed like this, and assume I don't belong here. Because if they admit it's personal, then they have to see it everywhere, even in themselves." He let the words settle. Amira touched his wrist gently. "You could let it go." He didn't answer. "I'm not saying you should," she added quickly. "Just, I know you, and I know what it costs you to carry this much truth at once." He looked at her, his expression softening. "Truth is only heavy when you've been trained to hold your breath around it." A soft ding signaled the beginning of taxi. The plane began its slow crawl away from the gate. The hum of the engines filled the cabin like a low heartbeat. It was the only sound. Then Miranda moved. She stepped into the aisle, smoothing her uniform, her badge pinned tight to her chest. She stopped next to Elijah's seat and cleared her throat. "I'd like to speak with you," she said, not quite asking permission. Elijah gestured slightly toward the empty seat across the aisle. "Here is fine." Miranda sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap. "I need to clarify something." Elijah waited. "I didn't mean to insult you or profile you. I didn't know who you were." "That's the problem," Elijah replied. Miranda blinked. "I didn't need you to know who I was to be treated with respect." He said, "That's the baseline, not a reward for having a title." She fumbled with her words. "I was trained." "No." Elijah cut in, still calm. "You were conditioned, and today, your conditioning spoke louder than your training." Miranda's eyes flicked toward the curtain behind her. She was searching for an exit, even if only from the conversation. Elijah leaned in slightly. "This isn't about you losing your job. It's about you facing the truth. You saw a black man in a hoodie and decided he was out of place. Before you even checked the manifest, before you asked for ID, you decided." Miranda's mouth trembled. She looked younger now, smaller. "I was scared of getting it wrong." She admitted, "You did." Elijah said, "And you still are." They sat in silence for a few seconds, the plane beginning its turn toward the runway. Then Elijah said, "I'm going to ask you one question, and I want the real answer, not the one they taught you." Miranda nodded. "How many passengers have you pulled aside because of how they looked?" Her lips parted, then closed. "More than a few," she said finally. "We were told to pay attention to visual inconsistencies. Hoodies, old shoes, no carry-on, no business markers, that kind of thing." "And how many of those passengers were white?" Elijah asked. Miranda didn't answer. She didn't have to. Brady spoke from the galley. "We weren't told to record that part," he said, "but not many." Elijah turned slightly in his seat. "That silence right there," he said, "that's why this moment matters, because your fear has become protocol, and your protocol became prejudice." The wheels left the ground. The cabin tilted slightly as the plane rose into the clouds. Miranda stood slowly, "I'm sorry," she said. "I believe you," Elijah replied, "but I'm still holding you accountable." She didn't argue. She just walked back to the galley and disappeared behind the curtain again. Harper whispered from behind her phone, "That's the moment." Amira looked over. "The shift?" she asked. "No," Harper said. "The calm, right before the system realizes it has to change or collapse." Elijah closed his eyes briefly and let the silence carry him upward. The plane leveled off somewhere above the Midwest. The seatbelt light flicked off, but no one moved. Not yet. It wasn't just the altitude pressing down anymore. It was the weight of everything that hadn't been said yet. Miranda Hale remained in the galley, her back turned to the cabin. She pretended to read something on the wall panel, a checklist, a temperature chart, anything that wasn't a reflection of her own conscience. Brady Collins had gone silent. His hands fidgeted with the edge of his tablet, flipping to the seating chart and back again, though nothing had changed. He kept glancing toward Elijah Brooks like he expected him to do something explosive. But Elijah never exploded. He didn't need to. Elijah was power-contained, like an ocean kept in a glass. Amira Sloan opened her laptop on the tray table between them. A red icon pulsed softly in the corner of the screen. "Board liaison is in. Compliance has joined. They're watching now," she whispered. Elijah nodded. "Any word from Media One outlets asking for comment? Another flagged your name on the shareholder registry." He exhaled through his nose. "This could stay quiet," she offered gently. He looked ahead. Not anymore. Harper Wind stood. The hum of the engines tried to mask her voice, but her tone cut through. "Mr. Brooks, I have one request. Before this ends." Elijah turned to her. Harper raised her phone, now recording clearly and openly. "I want your permission to use all of this, not just for an article, for the truth. Not to sensationalize it, but to document it. In full." Elijah looked into her eyes. They were serious, focused, but not opportunistic. "I'm not interested in revenge," he said. "I'm interested in reform." "Then let me help you make it real," she said. He nodded. And then, slowly, deliberately, he stood. Across the aisle, Greg Talbot shifted uncomfortably. Elijah turned toward the front of the cabin and addressed everyone at once. His voice was steady, firm, and low, not loud, but loud enough. "My name is Elijah M. Brooks. I'm a board-level stakeholder in Aeromark Airlines. I own 38% of the company." The words hit the cabin like a dropped curtain. Greg's head jerked sideways. Miranda, still in the galley, stiffened. Brady's tablet slipped slightly in his hand. "I didn't introduce myself earlier," Elijah continued, "because I didn't need to. I came here to fly, like every other person on this plane, with a valid ticket, with cleared ID, and with the same right to be treated with dignity." He turned toward Miranda's direction, not shouting, just aiming his voice where it belonged, but instead, I was judged. Suspicion was cast. My seat was questioned, and so was my character, not because of something I did, but because of how I looked. He paused. Let the silence settle around that truth. Miranda stepped out from the galley slowly, her face pale, her eyes wide. Greg finally spoke, voice cracked with disbelief. You're on the board." Elijah turned his head toward him and said nothing. Greg sat back. Amira stood beside Elijah, holding her tablet like a witness in court. "Miranda Hale," Elijah said, "you didn't just fail to verify a name. You ignored identification. You bypassed protocol. You accused a verified passenger of boarding fraud and directed other crew to treat him as a security risk." Miranda swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "That's exactly the point," Elijah said. "You didn't know, and yet you assumed." He turned to Brady. You confirmed her actions without verifying the manifest. You supported removal without checking printed documents. You let bias operate unchecked. Brady opened his mouth, then closed it. No defense, Elijah said softly. Only responsibility. Harper took a small step forward, capturing it all. This moment right here, she said to no one in particular. This is what accountability sounds like. Miranda tried again. I didn't mean to accuse you. I was following instinct. That instinct, Elijah replied, has no place in policy. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out his Aeromark access badge. He held it in the air, clearly visible to the cabin. This badge gives me the authority to initiate executive discipline for breaches in conduct, ethics, and passenger treatment. Brady looked like he might faint. Miranda's hands began to tremble. I don't want a scene, Elijah said, but I won't allow silence anymore. He turned to Amira. Initiate formal removal from active duty for Miranda Hale, effective immediately. Reassign Brady Collins to internal compliance review pending audit results. Amira tapped her tablet. Logged. Timestamp 7:53 a.m. Miranda stepped back, her lips parting. Please, she said softly. Can I speak off record? Harper lowered her phone. Waiting. No, Elijah said. You had your chance. When you made your assumption in front of a cabin full of strangers, that was your statement. This, he gestured around the cabin, this is your consequence. Miranda didn't cry, but she didn't fight either. Brady sank into the jump seat, eyes hollow. Amira's voice came next. Corporate compliance has acknowledged the action. Badge access revoked. She will be escorted upon landing. Elijah didn't move, didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He just nodded and took his seat again. The calm in his chest wasn't peace. It was conviction. Beside him, Amira whispered, that was the moment. No, Elijah said, that was the correction. The moment comes next. Harper pressed stop on her recording, and the cabin sat in stunned, silent reverence of what they just witnessed. For several minutes after Elijah Brooks sat back down in seat 2A, the cabin was completely still. It wasn't silence by accident. It was reverence. What had just unfolded without yelling, without threats, without force, had redefined authority in the space of one aisle and 100 quiet stares. Harper Wynne reviewed the footage on her phone. Every word had been captured, every shift in tone, every moment of disbelief. It wasn't a takedown. It was a mirror, and everyone on that flight had seen something of themselves in it. Amira tapped quietly on her screen beside Elijah. I just received a notice from compliance. They're opening a 30-day audit into crew conduct, complaint suppression, and informal behavior tracking. They want your direction on how far we take it. Elijah's eyes didn't move from the seat back in front of him. All the way, he said. Amira nodded. I want every informal policy exposed. Elijah added, every red flag memo, every profile-based boarding note. I want to know how long this has been happening. He wasn't angry, not in the way people expected anger to look, but his calm had sharpened. It had turned from silence into scalpel. Brady Collins remained in his jump seat. He wasn't checking his tablet anymore. He wasn't even pretending to. His fingers rested on the armrests, and his eyes stared straight ahead. Every few seconds, he blinked quickly, as if trying to clear something he couldn't name. Miranda Hale was no longer in the galley. She'd gone to the rear of the aircraft after Amira confirmed her removal from duty. She had handed over her headset without a word. Her badge had been set down on the tray table beside the crew coffee pot like a final offering. The remaining crew didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. Greg Talbot still hadn't spoken, But unlike earlier, he no longer sat with smug dismissal. His shoulders had rounded slightly, his gaze was downward. Even he couldn't justify what had just happened. But the most unexpected moment came not from Harper, not from Elijah, not from Amira. It came from Brady. He stood up slowly, took a breath, and approached Elijah's seat. "Mr. Brooks," he began, voice low. Elijah looked up, nodding once for him to continue. "I need to say something. Not for show, not because I'm trying to keep my job, but because I've been part of this." Amira narrowed her eyes slightly, but stayed silent. Brady continued. "There have been other complaints about profiling, about how some passengers get second looks while others don't. Some were verbal, some written. Most of them didn't reach corporate." Harper turned in her seat. "Why not?" she asked. Brady glanced at her, then back to Elijah. "Because we filtered them. We'd get feedback after flights, mostly from non-white passengers, saying they felt singled out, questioned, looked at funny, denied upgrades, ignored for pre-boarding. It wasn't in writing. Not always. So we labeled it as passenger confusion or staff miscommunication, and that was that." Harper's voice dropped. "You suppressed evidence." Brady nodded. His hands were shaking slightly. "There's this unspoken understanding. You rack up too many bias-related complaints. You lose prime route eligibility. You don't get assigned to international flights. You don't move up. So people protect themselves. We talk about it off shift, after flights. We know it's wrong, but it's fear, not malice, just fear." Elijah's expression didn't change. "Fear of what? Of being seen as the problem," Brady said. "Of being called out for something we can't even name clearly. It's not written policy. It's tone. It's looks. It's the way someone hesitates before saying, 'Have a good flight,' to someone who doesn't look business." He stepped back. "I'm sorry," he said, "and I'll cooperate with the audit. I'll name names if I have to. I'll tell the truth." Elijah didn't nod. He didn't thank him. He just let the truth hang there. Then he spoke. "You weren't told to profile," Elijah said, "but you were never told not to." Brady exhaled slowly. "And that's how bias survives." Elijah continued. "In the spaces between rules." Harper was already typing. She was no longer just a journalist. She was a recorder of living testimony. Amira turned toward Elijah. "What do you want to call the initiative?" He didn't hesitate. "Skyline truth," he said. "Transparency, equity, and real-time passenger accountability. I want every single complaint logged in the moment it's made, not by crew, but by passengers themselves. Tablets in the seats, anonymized, time-stamped." Harper blinked. "That's a first for the airline industry." "It won't be the last," Elijah said. He reached into his bag and pulled out a notepad. Old school paper. He scribbled a few words, then handed it to Amira. A policy draft. Short, precise. If it's said, it's logged. If it's seen, it's addressed. If it's biased, it's corrected. No branding, no fluff, just clarity. Brady read it over Amira's shoulder. His face was pale. "I never knew people like you flew with us," he said quietly. Elijah turned toward him slowly. "That's because people like me don't advertise. We endure." Brady nodded once and stepped away. Returning to the galley, Harper leaned forward. "Elijah, may I quote you on something?" He looked at her. "Anything," he said. She pressed record. "What do you want people to remember most about this day?" Elijah didn't pause. "That the most dangerous form of discrimination isn't shouted," he said. "It's whispered. It's casual. It's dressed up as doubt. And if we don't name it, it keeps flying." She hit stop. and that became the quote she would lead with. Not because it was perfect, but because it was undeniable. The hum of the engines grew louder as the aircraft crossed over Pennsylvania. The captain made a brief announcement, smooth skies ahead, estimated landing in 42 minutes. No one listened, not because they didn't hear him, but because something far more profound had taken over the cabin. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't even tension anymore. It was reflection. Elijah Brooks sat in 2A with his eyes closed, not asleep, just still. Inside him, emotions churned not just from the morning, but from years before it. Airports he had walked through where eyes had followed him, where TSA pulled him aside randomly, where people assumed his seat was a mistake unless he was in coach. He never complained, never caused a scene. He had learned to survive in silence, but now that silence had turned into something else. A reckoning. Amira Sloan sat beside him, her gaze scanning the tablet screen. But she wasn't really reading. Her thoughts were on the next steps. The legal teams that would have to review everything, the PR department that would need to brace for what Harper might publish. And then she looked at Elijah again, how composed he remained. Even now. "Elijah," she said softly, "how do you feel?" He opened his eyes. Then, after a long pause, he said, "Like I just stepped into a war I've been avoiding my whole life." Amira blinked. "You started this airline to make change, to be different." "I did," he said. "But being different in secret doesn't fix the system. It protects you from it. That's what I've been doing, protecting myself. Quietly, comfortably." She tilted her head. "You think you should have spoken up sooner, I think. I should have stopped letting comfort disguise itself as strategy." The honesty in his voice settled into the air between them. It wasn't self-pity. It was clarity. Across the aisle, Harper Wynn had opened a second notepad. Her phone was off for now. She wasn't documenting this for publication anymore. She was documenting it because some stories deserve to be kept, even if no one else sees them. "May I ask you something off record?" she said gently. Elijah turned. "Of course. Do you ever wish you weren't the one who had to carry this?" He smiled faintly. "Every day. But I also know if not me." Then who Harper nodded. And for once, she had no words. In the rear galley, Miranda Hale sat alone. Her badge had been collected. Her access card had been revoked. She had sent a single text to her husband. "I may lose my job today." No explanation, just truth. Tears had come and gone. Now she just sat staring at her reflection in the stainless steel of the coffee machine. She had always believed she was fair. She voted blue. She donated to charities. She had black colleagues. She read the right books. But none of that stopped her from assuming a black man in a hoodie didn't belong in seat 2A. And now she had to live with that. Behind the curtain of progress, she had played her part in keeping the system comfortable. "Why did I do that?" she whispered to herself. But no one answered. Because sometimes you're the only one who can, near the front. Brady Collins sat in the jump seat with his hands clasped tightly. He thought about his own father, a man who had worked logistics for Delta, who once told him, "Keep your head down and things will stay easy." Brady had done that for years. When bias crept in, he told himself it wasn't his problem. When Elijah's name came up in the system, he didn't double-check, because part of him assumed the computer made the mistake, not him. Now he knew better. Now he knew who had made the mistake. And worse, he knew why. He watched Elijah from behind, the way the man sat straight, centered, the way he carried all this without demanding sympathy or surrendering to rage. "Integrity," Brady whispered. "That's what it looks like." And it made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Ashamed. The cabin crew began soft preparations for descent. They passed out water bottles, tucked in tray tables. Most passengers didn't move. Their hands rested in their laps. Their eyes were on Elijah. He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't even a public figure. But now he was a symbol. A mirror held up to everyone who had looked away before. Greg Talbot finally broke his silence. He leaned forward, voice low. "Mr. Brooks, I owe you an apology." Elijah turned slightly but didn't answer right away. "I sat across from you, watched it all unfold, and I didn't say a word. I didn't step in. I didn't ask questions, because I assumed you would handle it or that it wasn't my place." Elijah looked him in the eye. "What made you realize it was Greg?" Swallowed. "My daughter. She's 12. Last month she asked me what I would do if I saw someone treated unfairly on a plane. I told her I'd speak up." Elijah's eyes softened just a little. "Now you have the chance to prove it." Greg nodded. "I'll testify, if it comes to that." Harper wrote it down, quietly, respectfully. Elijah turned to her. "Include it." His quote, she asked. "No." Elijah said, the whole moment. Outside the window, New York City began to appear in the distance, a faint, shimmering outline of skyline and steel. A voice crackled from the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent shortly. Please return to your seats and ensure all belongings are secured." It felt strange, normal life resuming after what had just unfolded, like trying to put the lid back on a truth that had already spilled everywhere. Amira leaned toward Elijah one more time. "You still want to walk out quietly?" Elijah looked out the window. "No," he said softly. "Not anymore." The landing gear lowered with a soft thud beneath their feet, a mechanical signal that the journey was almost over. But for Elijah Brooks, this flight hadn't just been from Los Angeles to New York. It had been from silence to declaration, from tolerance to accountability. He fastened his seatbelt slowly, eyes still fixed out the window. The skyline had grown larger, sharper, undeniable. It was a city that never slept, and one that would wake up to a headline very different by the time this plane taxied to the gate. Harper Wynn placed her pen down. "Elijah." He turned toward her. "I know you don't care about press," she said softly. "But when I publish this, people are going to ask why you didn't act sooner." "Why now?" Elijah leaned back slightly. "Because I didn't realize how far I'd drifted from the boy who started all this." Harper blinked. "What boy?" Elijah's voice turned inward, reflective. "I was 16 when I flew for the first time. My mother bought me a cheap coach ticket to visit Howard University. I wore my best clothes, press shirt, khakis. I was so excited I couldn't stop smiling. But the man next to me kept shifting, inch by inch, like my presence contaminated his comfort." He paused. "I remember thinking, one day I'll build a company where nobody has to shrink in their seat." Harper was silent. "And then you did." "Yes," Elijah replied. "But I made it so clean, so polished, that I forgot that comfort can dull the very edge that started it all." Amira placed a hand lightly over his. It was subtle, grounding. "You didn't forget," she said. "You just needed a reminder." The plane dipped gently, wheels skimming asphalt, then pressing firmly into the runway. A collective breath was held, then released. Touchdown. Harper resumed scribbling. Behind them, passengers began to shift, collecting their things, but no one stood. Not yet. There was still something unfinished in the air. Brady Collins stepped into the front galley. He faced the passengers, looked toward Elijah, and raised his voice, slightly not loud, but enough for the first few rows to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, as we taxi to the gate, I want to acknowledge something. What happened on this flight wasn't just a mistake. It was a reflection of deeper issues many of us have ignored. Whispers stirred. Brady continued, his voice cracking slightly. I want to apologize on behalf of the crew, not with a script, not with PR polish, but honestly. Elijah Brooks was not only a passenger we failed to respect, he is a man we should have never doubted. He looked at Elijah, and I hope sincerely that this moment becomes something more than apology. I hope it becomes action. The entire cabin remained frozen. Then, slowly, a passenger near the back began clapping, just once, then again. Then a second passenger joined, then a third, until half the cabin was applauding, not loudly, not performatively, but with an energy that said, we see this, we felt it. Elijah didn't rise, he didn't wave, he just nodded once, acknowledging the moment without claiming it. The plane came to a full stop at Gate 14 of JFK International Airport. A flight that had begun with judgment had ended with a mirror held up to an entire system. Greg Talbot stood and turned to Elijah. I meant what I said. If you need me for testimony, for public support, I'll do it. Elijah looked at him, something almost forgiving in his eyes. I don't need you to do it for me, he said. Do it for whoever sits in this seat after me. Greg nodded, then moved down the aisle. Harper leaned across the row. I won't use anything you marked off the record. But can I quote the line about the boy who dreamed of Howard? Elijah smiled. You can, but don't frame it as a story of success. Harper tilted her head. Frame it, Elijah said, as a story of return. Behind them, Miranda Hale was escorted off quietly by a member of the ground operations team. No cuffs, no shouting, just quiet consequence. A job lost not because of a single mistake, but because of a mindset carried too long. She didn't say a word as she left. Her eyes were red, her shoulders lowered. For the first time in her life, she had seen the full weight of a moment she once would have dismissed. Brady approached Elijah once more. Sir, he said quietly, there's going to be backlash. I know. You'll be accused of using your power unfairly. I know that too. And still, you acted. Elijah looked up. That's the job, he replied. You don't just lead when it's easy. You lead when it might cost you. Brady blinked, then gave a single, solemn nod. As passengers finally began to disembark, several paused near Elijah's seat. A middle-aged black woman touched his shoulder. Thank you, she said, tears in her eyes. You didn't just sit in that seat for you. A young man in a college hoodie followed, offering a fist bump. You reminded me why I applied to business school. Even an elderly white man, perhaps in his 80s, stopped and said, that was the most honest flight I've ever taken. Elijah accepted each word without showmanship. His responses were quiet, simple in eye contact, a nod, a soft thank you, because this wasn't a campaign. It was a reckoning. As the cabin emptied, only Elijah, Amira, and Harper remained seated. The sun outside had shifted slightly, now casting a golden hue across the carpeted floor of the aircraft. Harper gathered her things, then hesitated. One last question. She said, What will you name the initiative replacing your bias prevention program? Elijah stood. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a small white envelope, and handed it to her. She opened it. Inside was a single printed phrase. The seat is not a privilege. It's a promise. Harper smiled. That's your legacy, isn't it? Elijah nodded. No. That's my beginning. They stepped off the aircraft and into a world that was already beginning to change. The conference room at Aeromark's corporate headquarters in Midtown Manhattan was larger than it needed to be. Rows of chairs had been arranged in neat, controlled symmetry, and soft lighting bounced off the brushed steel walls. Elijah Brooks stood behind the podium at the front, not flanked by attorneys, not backed by a line of executives. Just him. And to his right, a single chair for Amira Sloan. Dozens of cameras lined the back wall. Every major network was present. Not because Aeromark had sent out a press release, but because word had already traveled across the country, carried by passengers who had lived it and by one journalist who had published it. Harper Wynn's article had gone live just 10 hours after the flight touched down. The man in 2A? What power looks like when it's quiet. It didn't just trend. It exploded. Because it was more than a viral incident, it was a blueprint. And now the world was watching what Elijah would do next. He took a breath and began. Good morning. My name is Elijah Brooks. I am the founder of Skyline Aviation and a shareholder representative of Aeromark Airlines, which recently acquired Skyline in a full integration deal. I speak today not as a CEO, not as a corporate figure, but as a passenger, as a black man, as a citizen of a system that still, in 2025, struggles to see us clearly. He let that sit. I am here today because of what happened on Flight 4871. But more than that, I am here because of what has happened quietly, repeatedly, to people like me, people who don't wear power on their sleeve, people who buy the ticket, pass the check, do everything right, and still get treated like a threat. He paused, not because of what we carry, but because of who we are. Camera shutters clicked softly. No one shifted in their seats. I was denied my seat not because of an error, but because of an assumption reinforced by an invisible pattern, one that hides behind policy and precaution, but begins with perception. He looked toward Amira, then back at the room. But let me be clear, this is not about one flight attendant, or one crew member, or even one airline. This is about the quiet algorithms of bias that live inside all our systems, the ones we don't see because we've trained ourselves not to look. A screen behind him lit up with a single word. Skyline. Elijah continued. Today, I'm announcing the launch of Skyline, a passenger-first equity program designed to transform how airlines measure accountability, transparency, and dignity. This initiative will provide passengers with real-time access to reporting tools, allow anonymous complaints to be registered from every seat on every flight, and automatically flag any incident tied to race, gender, disability, or appearance. No one will be too high or too low to be heard. He paused again. And starting immediately, every member of Aeromark's in-flight staff will be required to complete a certification process built around implicit bias training, not once per year, but every 6 months, with rotating case studies based on actual passenger experiences, not simulations, not hypotheticals, reality. The journalists began taking notes faster. Amira stood and handed a folder to each press row transcripts, pilot policies, outlines of the Skyline initiative, and documentation from the in-flight incident. Elijah looked back out at the crowd. What happened to me could have happened to anyone without power, without backup, without evidence. But I had all three, and I still nearly lost my seat. So imagine the ones who don't, who get off the plane quietly, who cry in bathrooms, who never get a chance to speak. His voice lowered. This initiative is for them. A journalist from a major outlet raised her hand. Mr. Brooks, are you planning to file a lawsuit? Elijah shook his head. No, I'm planning to fix the plane while it's still in the air. Lawsuits don't change culture. They change headlines. I'm after something bigger. Another voice called out, "Have you spoken to Miranda Hale since the incident?" He paused. "No," he said truthfully, "but I wish her clarity. I hope she takes this not as punishment, but as a moment of awakening. I don't believe in destroying people. I believe in dismantling the patterns that allow people to harm without realizing they're doing it." The room grew still again, because that wasn't just corporate talk. It was conviction. A different journalist stood. "What do you say to the critics who think you used your position unfairly?" Elijah nodded slowly. "I say they're right to ask that question. Power must always be questioned, even mine. But ask it in context. I did not fire someone for insulting me. I addressed a pattern that was already there. I didn't start a war. I ended a silence." Amira looked over, pride quietly blooming behind her steady expression. Harper stood up next, notepad closed. "Elijah," she said, "what do you want this to mean, 5 years from now?" He smiled. "I want someone to walk into a plane, sit in 2A or 24C or the jump seat, and not have to carry history on their shoulders. I want a flight attendant to see a young black man in a hoodie and think, that could be the CEO. Because he might be, or maybe he's not. Maybe he's a mechanic, a student, a poet. Doesn't matter. I want that moment to carry no weight, no hesitation, just a greeting. That's it. Just, welcome aboard." The room was silent, and in that silence, something shifted. It wasn't just applause that followed. It was understanding, real, quiet, and deeply earned. When the press conference ended, Elijah stepped away from the podium. He didn't linger. He didn't shake hands. But one journalist, younger than the rest, caught him just before he exited. "Mr. Brooks," she said breathlessly, "my father told me about you. He said he met you once. Years ago. You were just a young founder then. You told him the world wouldn't change on its own, that we'd have to make it uncomfortable before it got better." Elijah's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Sounds like something I'd say. He was a porter at JFK," she added. "You gave him a tip and said, 'One day I'm going to own a fleet.'" Elijah chuckled. He remembered that. He never forgot it. She said, "He passed last year, but he'd be proud to see today." Elijah nodded, moved, not outwardly, just quietly, inwardly. "Thank you for telling me," he said, and with that, he walked out the side door, not with an entourage, not with a mic, but with purpose. 3 days after the press conference, Elijah Brooks sat alone in Terminal D of JFK Airport. No entourage, no press, no announcement of his arrival. Just him, a black leather briefcase, and a simple one-way boarding pass to Atlanta. He had chosen this terminal for a reason. It wasn't the executive lounge. It wasn't even a private gate. It was one of the older wings of the airport, a place he remembered from his early days back when he flew standby and held on to hope more than confirmed tickets. And even now, despite the media firestorm, the global attention, the policy shifts, he sat unnoticed, just another man waiting for his gate to update. He liked it that way. He sipped his coffee slowly, watching the people around him, parents corralling children, solo travelers reading quietly, an older couple holding hands as they gazed out at the tarmac. It grounded him, reminded him why he did this, why he endured, why he spoke up not for the applause, but for the moments no one sees. Mr. Brooks. He turned to see a young gate agent standing beside him. She wore the new Aeromark pin on her lapel, a silver Skyline over a set of wings. "Yes, I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly, glancing around as if nervous someone might overhear. "For everything, for speaking up, for not backing down." Elijah smiled. "Thank you for saying that." She hesitated, then added, We all watched the conference and training. Management made it required viewing. I cried during the part when you said the seat is not a privilege, but a promise. He nodded. It is. She looked down. I've seen it happen. You know the quiet bias. People being passed over, ignored, assumed. I didn't always know what to do. And now Elijah asked. Now I do. He extended his hand. She shook it, her grip firm. What's your name? He asked. Kayla, she said. Kayla Jones. Well, Kayla Jones, Elijah replied. You're the reason this matters. As she walked away, Elijah turned back toward the runway. A jetliner took off in the distance, rising into a gray sky that was just beginning to clear. Sunlight pierced through the clouds like slow revelation. A moment later, Harper Wynn appeared beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. I figured you'd still be here, she said, handing one to him. He took it with a nod. You following me now? She grinned, just making sure the ending lands. He chuckled. I thought you were done writing. I was, she said, but then you became more than the story. Elijah raised an eyebrow. Now you're the lens. She continued. People aren't just talking about race. They're talking about power, silence, assumptions, and what it means to break a pattern without burning it all down. He leaned back in his chair. That's not just me. No, she agreed. But you made it visible. They sat in companionable silence for a while. No need to speak. Just the soft announcements echoing through the terminal and the occasional roar of a departing flight. Eventually, Harper turned to him. What's next? He didn't answer right away. Then, softly, he said, I think I'm going to disappear for a little while. Do the work quietly. Not just policy work, real, personal work. Harper nodded. You know, people still think strength is loud, she said. They don't understand that sometimes. The strongest thing you can do is just stay. Elijah looked at her. Stay visible. Stay human, she replied. He smiled, setting his coffee down. That day on the plane, he said, when Miranda asked me to show her my ID, I wasn't angry because she doubted me. I was angry because I let myself expect it. Harper's eyes softened. I didn't realize how far I'd accepted the low bar. He folded his hands. That's what I want to undo. Not just systems, not just procedures. I want to undo the quiet ways we teach ourselves to shrink. A boarding call rang out over the loudspeaker. Flight 2219 to Atlanta. Boarding at gate D14. Harper looked at him. That's you. He nodded. She stood. Well then, I guess this is goodbye. For now. He said. She extended her hand. He took it. Thank you for writing what mattered. He said. Thank you for living it, she replied. As he walked toward the gate, passengers began to line up. No one looked at him twice. No one asked to see extra identification. He was just a man with a briefcase and a boarding pass. When he reached the gate agent, she smiled. Good morning, Mr. Brooks, Kayla said, her voice calm and clear. Welcome aboard. No hesitation, no suspicion, just recognition, just respect. As he stepped through the door, Harper pulled out her phone one last time. She opened a blank document. Title, The Man Who Changed the Seat. She stared at it, then began to type. He didn't carry anger on his face. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply reminded us what we had forgotten, that dignity should never be questioned, and that silence does not mean surrender. Elijah Brooks didn't demand the seat. He defined it, and in doing so, he offered all of us a chance to take ours with integrity. She hit save. And in that moment, the world had changed not with force, but with grace. In the end, Elijah Brooks didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't need to raise his voice to raise the stakes. He simply stood in the truth and forced the system to look at itself. This wasn't just about a seat in first class. It was about all the unseen moments where dignity is questioned, all the flights where assumptions speak louder than facts, all the times people are asked to prove their worth just to be treated like they belong. Elijah used his power not to punish, but to reveal. And what he revealed wasn't just bias. It was the quiet cruelty of expectation. He walked off that plane with more than a title. He walked off with a mission to make sure no one anywhere ever has to shrink in their seat again. So what about you? Next time you see someone being treated differently, will you speak up? Because change doesn't need permission. It needs people brave enough to act. If this story moved you, help us keep these voices heard. Hit like, tap share, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss a story that matters. We're just getting started, and the seat next to justice is always open.